we can't summarize 85 years in 5 minutes, but I'm going to give you my version. Mainly the Dr. Hefferlin's physics life.
You're exactly in the right place.
Very grossly, we can divide his Dr. Hefferlin's life into 4 regions. There was the first one, and he was born in 1929 in Paris, and then in 1936 he came to the USA. In Northern California, Central California, grew up, a whole story about how he got involved with Adventism, not from his parents, from the Baldwins, who were friends of the family. He went to PUC, graduated in 1951 with a physics major. He went to CalTech, got a PhD in 1955. And CalTech was when he walked into CalTech, he had just been the top of the class, had never had to, he was just everything. He went to CalTech, and the first test that he took, he didn't get a very good grade in it. And so he went to the grocery store and bought a case of Campbell's soup, and he went to the laboratory and had Bunsen burner, and he lived in the laboratory and studied and ate Campbell's soup, and says ruined his stomach because he just, but then he, I mean, CalTech, for, I think that Bruce can tell us, CalTech is the #1 physics school in the nation, in the world. And then in 1954, he graduated, he graduated in 55. He got married in 1954 to Inelda. And then in 1955, he came to Southern. And the fall of he arrived here in 1955. And the physics department was in Hackman, which is now the Religion Building. Dr. Hefferlin was very involved in research. He came here, taught all the physics courses, a lot of high-level math classes those first years. The first summer, he had 3 students in general physics lab, general physics. And so then in the summer of 56, it was coming up to the fall of 55 and 56. Then starting in the summer of 57, they said, you don't have enough students, and so we're not going to let you teach 3 students. That's not cost effective. We're going to have you go to the grocery store and mark the groceries and stuff. And he wasn't very excited about that. So he wrote some letters and went to California the summers of 57 and 58. He went to a place called the National Radiation Defense Laboratory. National Radiation Defense Laboratory. And I think that's what some people called skunk works. I'm not sure, but anyway, he did research in those summertime. His specialty was spectroscopy. Here at Southern, in the fall of 57, Sputnik went up. Big deal. The end of the world. Can you imagine Adventists when the Sputnik went up? And so they asked Dr. Hefferlin to give a convocation talk, and he did. And he said, a tremendous accomplishment in the scientific community, but we have known the physics and math of this for years. It's not going to be the end of the world. This is just one thing going around in an orbit like the moon does. And so he was a calming effect. Okay. And so then after Sputnik, there was a big surge to science. And so Dr. Hefferlin got grants. And he got a grant that was sufficient to carry on his research. He was doing experimental spectroscopy. He had like an arc welder, and it would make a plasma, and then they would put different materials in there and then look at the spectrum and see what it was. And a room almost this size had a $40,000 mirror on loan from the University of Wisconsin with lines on it for a diffraction. And so then you take the light from that, and it would send it out and break it up into the colors. And then he had a detector and hooked it onto a train and to move it so that you could measure it. And just set up, had a full-time technician named Bob McReynolds, tremendously capable with his hands and to build anything. The Helmholtz coils that we use today in the E over M experiment were built by hand by Bob McReynolds when he was here. So, and Dr. Hefferlin wasn't by himself doing research then, because he had Bill Mundy was here for a few years, Joe Hutcherson was here for a few years, Bob McCurdy came back and taught for a while. Then the next level would be a third level in 1970. In 1970, the physics department moved to Daniels Hall. I came in the fall of '68, and we moved in 1970. And Dr. Hefferlin made a big shift. He found that to continue experimental spectroscopy was just plain expensive and took time. Now, time he would allocate the time. So he went from experimental spectroscopy to theoretical, and he started on the beginning of a million-year project. And that was the periodic chart is the basis of so much in chemistry. His goal was to have a periodic chart of the diatomic molecules, and then you could look at all the diatomic ones. And then since then it has expanded to triatomics and others. Back into the 57, 58 era, he started consulting at Oak Ridge. And somehow, I don't know the exact details, he got in with McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis. He sent one of his students who got a PhD there and got a job every Christmas vacation, Thanksgiving vacation. Dr. Hefferlin would go to St. Louis. They couldn't have Christmas until he got home from St. Louis, because he'd go to McDonnell Douglas. They were studying the reentry of Gemini missiles and Mercury capsules and all of these, and Dr. Hefferlin's expertise in being able to look at materials and analyze them spectroscopically to tell what the temperature was, what they were doing, and all this, he was very much valued. And so, and then one of his students got in there full time. When Bob McCurdy finished a degree in like '63, he was going to go and teach somewhere, and Ron Fox was leaving McDonnell Douglas, and Doc told Bob McCurdy, "You better go to McDonnell Douglas and get," and so Bob did. But anyway, so 1970, he started on this million-year project, and then missing one in between here, 1967, 68, just the year before I came, Doc took it off and he went as a visiting scholar to UTC. And he took the year, a sabbatical, and he taught at UTC. Then in '70, after I had come, we moved to Daniels Hall. And he started on the Million Year Project. and he took a few trips to Russia. In the spring semester of 79, he was gone the whole spring semester to Russia. In the spring of 82, he was gone to Russia. And then from 85 to 86, he went to the University of Denver and was a visiting scholar for the whole year. And then the fourth phase would be Hickman Science Center. And we came here in the Christmas of 97, so I'm going to call it 98. I hope that's right. Chris knows that's when he came.
96.
Sorry?
Oh, yeah. December 96.
December 96, so it was basically 97. And that year, Doc did not retire. He switched to full-time research. He occasionally would teach a class for us, but not very often. That's pretty much, my 5 minutes is gone a couple times over.
I just want to take just a couple of minutes and share with you, some of these are posted on the Facebook page that some of you may have seen. What's it called? In Memoriam, Ray Hefferlin. But there's a few things I just want to point out. A couple of anecdotes from years ago from students. So what was it like being a student for Doc? This is maybe geared more for the students, but I think we can all learn something from it. Whether you are a physics major or not. And then a couple of comments from colleagues of his in the research world. Oh, it is showing. What do you know? Yeah, well, once I get it. Well, we've got to, let's see. How do you restart a slideshow that? Let me try that and see if this works. There we go. Well, that'll work, I guess. So, one of the first people that I want to talk about is Clifton Keller. This is Clifton Keller. This is Doc, and it's hard to tell who's older. There's lots and lots of stories. I was telling my colleagues a few minutes ago about a story Anelda told me about him wanting to borrow a telescope from a neighbor. He came in, was a professor here. He wanted to borrow a telescope from a neighbor, and the neighbor had told him, sure, come anytime, but he went one time when he wasn't home and his wife was at home, and his wife basically wouldn't let this little neighbor kid come and borrow the telescope. She had to wait till her husband came home. When she found out who he really was, she was a little bit mortified. But so he looked very young. There's another story where he was sitting at the table in the gymnasium helping students that wanted to come by to help with registration, and one of the administrators from Southern came by and kindly informed him that the Collegedale Academy registration was down the hill, and he should go down there. So this is some spectroscopy work. Clifton Keller wrote some things, but he pointed out one thing I gotta ask about. He mentioned some things that he learned, lessons that he had learned. One of them was the importance to take care of what God has given you. And any of us that know Doc, of course, know that recycling and not throwing things out, not just recycling because it's good to recycle, but taking care of things. And up comes the story of the Pontiac. Nobody's mentioned redshift in a long time, but when did he finally get rid of redshift, and how long did he have it, and how many miles were on it?
I don't know. But he has a history of cars. When he came here, he had a 50 Chevrolet, and the Baldwins in California, after they had Lorelei, bought them a 57 Chevy, like in maybe 60. They had it for years. Doc never bought a new car. And when he had a car, back in those days, you had to put in spark plugs, you had to put in points, you had to put in a coil once in a while, you had to put in, he had a graph, and it had the miles of the car and when he put in a battery. and what the date was, and when he put in spark plugs, and when he put in, and so you'd say, oh my, I'm going to have to put brake shoes on this, it's coming up. And he just had that all documented. And the red shift was a straight shift 1963 Pontiac that he got when it was 3 years old.
And he had it in the 1980s when I was a student here. I mean,
for almost 2 decades.
and the brakes weren't working, and so he would pull up slowly, get out, run around, and put a block under the wheel to keep it from rolling. Okay, so one of the things he learned, take care of what God has given you. Another thing that Clifton points out, so Clifton graduated in 1958, 59 or something. I don't know when he graduated, but the other thing that I want to point out, and we're running out of time, is he taught us to think, is what he says. He assigned a paper once in a math class. So he took math classes from him because Doc taught math. One of the math classes was calculus, and he gave them the problem of, would you get wetter by running through the rain or by walking? And they had to solve that sort of practical problem in Tennessee. But he also assigned a paper so for students to decide, to take a position on whether denominational schools should accept money from the federal government. So it wasn't just a math problem, but it was a thinking problem involved with it.
And he invented issues in science and religion.
Yeah, that's maybe the contribution that so many students have benefited from. How do you think about carefully your understanding of God in relationship to your understanding of science, and how can that help you? Numerous people wrote and said that was the turning point in their life. People have written in about that. Another person, Bill Mundy, some of you may know, had an interesting story, and this is the one I think we'll have to quit on maybe. He had a conversion experience when he was here. He graduated in 1961, Bill Mundy did, and he had a conversion experience. First year he was here at Southern. And as many young men did at that time when they had a conversion experience, they decided they needed to go into ministry and become a religion major. So he had decided that. So he was going to go talk to the religion department. But unfortunately, the religion department wasn't open at 7:30 in the morning, and general physics met at 7:30 in the morning. And so he had to go see, I'm going to go to general physics first, and then I'll go and talk to the religion department. Well, that day in general physics, he tried this 3 days, actually. And each of those 3 days, Doc was in here teaching, and he put a quote on the board that had from Ellen White's writings that talked about the importance of influence of science teachers, this is amazing, over young people. And it was the only 3 times he did that. And after the 3rd time, Bill says, I finally decided maybe I was supposed to stay in physics. And so he never did go talk to the religion department. And 15 or 20 years later, he asked Doc about it, and Doc said, yeah, that was the only 3 days I ever put those up there. Anyhow, and then Bill went on to teach for many years, 30-some years at PUC, and did research and whatnot. One of Doc's goals was to remind people that anything you do, and particularly if you're in the sciences, you can have an influence on other people that's positive. He taught Russian to this one girl that wrote in. She was a music major. And the thing that stuck out about her letter to me was something I think all of us can probably relate to that knew Doc. She took Russian from him because he came back from one of his trips, and then he taught Russian. And so she was from South America. She didn't pick up on it very quickly, and he was very patient. And this was a whole class he was teaching, and they were all kind of slow, and he was very patient. So she mentions his patience. But then I think this is something that many people can relate to. Years afterwards, he hadn't seen her in years and years and years, and she approached him, and she said she was moved by his obvious delight in seeing me again. I hadn't been a physics major, but he remembered me. And the best comparison I can think of is a small puppy wagging his tail and shaking all over with joy at seeing a loved one again. Doc would just you'd walk into his office and it was like the world stopped and there you were. It's like, oh, hi, come on in. He might have been doing who knows what, but he was delighted to see you over and over. His professional colleagues, I have a couple more pictures I'm going to throw up here, just so, he had professional colleagues all over the world. And this is a guy who's a renowned, Eric Sherry, he came here and gave a talk, but in his area of research, he's at UCLA and leads a whole coalition on studying periodic systems. This is the group of them in Peru in the last conference they had related to that.
In the front, the baseball cap.
Right, this is Eric Sherry, this is Doc, and then this picture back here, this was Doc right there as well. The thing that people, his professional colleagues have been writing in, the thing they write in over and over was mention of his hospitality. They would come here and visit him, and he would take them on outings, and they would meet them in their house. And he would go there, and they remember his kindness, his thoughtfulness. He would take pictures of people at conferences. And when he never did a digital camera. And so they would get developed back here, and he would write a little personal note and mail them to the people that he had been at the conference with. Just his thoughtfulness, and that's the kind of stuff that they remember. There's a guy who, I'm going to say, I don't know if you read all these notes on Facebook. This one's here. Guillermo Restrepo was a colleague that he met not that long ago, a young guy, but he used to talk to me about him a lot. He thought he was great guns. He came here to talk once, and then Doc went down to Columbia when they started a program in this. And so I'm going to, I think, end with this comment. It's rather poetic. So Guillermo writes this: if nature is periodic, I hope we can get another fellow, another singular man, a warm human being, as Professor Hefferlin in the coming period. So a little play on his research. Such a kind and calm man of big glasses, tender eyes, big heart, and soft voice. Anyhow, I think that's going to end our time here together. I just want the students that are here. Many of you faculty knew him pretty well, but maybe not the old days. I wanted you to have a sense of where Doc fit into the whole history of Southern. He's been here for a long time, and the role that he played, and maybe there's something we can learn from the way he treated people and the way he interacted with people. His love to push science as a religious endeavor, to understand God and help other people, not just science for the sake of science, and the way he treated people. Just outstanding example.